All right. Hey, everybody. I think we should be live now. Ben and I are here. We're just talking about the fact that we were just going to push the button, go live, and yap for an hour. So that's the game plan today. With me, I have Ben Erwin. If you search for him on LinkedIn, you're going to have to look for Benjamin Erwin. But Ben and I go way back. I mean, several years, and we met through LinkedIn. And so, Ben, I think a great way is just always let's start by telling the people about you. Who are you? What do you do? All that kind of stuff.
All right. So currently, I am an instructional designer at Purdue University. I've been there for
Cool.
just under 2 years. Prior to that, um, I was a writing center director and I taught composition at a university. So I was doing a whole host of things, including teaching, tutoring students one on one, managing and training a staff, and working with faculty across the university. And prior to that, an entirely previous life, I was a journalist for the better part of a decade. So, kind of all of those skills eventually
Yeah.
filtered into every stage of where I'm at now.
Yeah. Okay, and so this is exactly why when we just spent like a minute or two because I told Ben, I said, I don't want to talk a lot before because we always find a good topic to talk about. Then we start talking before we go live, and then it's weird to try to keep it going once we go live or we bring people into the middle of our conversations. So Ben, I love that because I said I think it's so important that people see that people's career paths are not linear. And when you were doing, part A of your career, you didn't necessarily know what part B was going to look like. And when you were doing part B, you didn't know what part C, how all these things were going to come together. And so, like, I think we'll take your most recent pivot because it's a common one that we see a lot of people talk about in on LinkedIn is this idea of moving from the education space, teaching, and moving to something more corporate, right? How did you make that decision to make that move? I mean, that's when we met, was when you were in the thick of that.
Yes. When you were helping me kind of decide that instructional design was an effective overlap of the Venn diagram of things that I have some experience with, things that I actually enjoy doing, and things that I wanted to continue doing. Um, so yeah, while I was teaching and directing a writing center, there were parts of that job that I really loved, and there were other elements of that role, like the pay, the long hours, like being constantly on call, essentially 24/7, and having so much of my time be allocated to putting out other people's fires and solving other people's problems. Uh, that really and I think a lot of transitioning teachers can relate to this, really contributed to burnout
Yeah.
and really that facilitated in many ways the literal need for that shift. I knew at a certain point around 2021, that I couldn't stay. It would not work. Something was going to break,
Yeah.
and it became a choice of I would rather find something else to do than continue this path that I'm on, where conditions weren't getting any better, pay wasn't getting any better, promises were being broken every single year, and I just sort of knew, all right, I have to figure out what that next move is and what that next step is. And, so my transition took a long time. I spent the better part of a year just researching what can I do with the experience that I have? What are the options that are available to me? And really, not only networking on LinkedIn, but researching options. And I looked at UX and customer success and instructional design and all of these other roles that kind of overlapped in one way or another with my
Mhm.
previous experience. And like I said, for me, what it came down to was figuring out where I could apply my knowledge and experience in a way that I would actually enjoy. And
Yeah.
one of the pieces of advice that I always try to give to transitioning teachers is this will take longer than you think. And you really have to, kind of do some research and dig into these things. And, networking is invaluable, but you
Yeah.
have to do it genuinely. And you have to try to offer something. If all you're doing is asking for coffee chats and help and answers to questions, many of which are Googleable, by the way, the internet exists. You can do a whole lot of research on your own without taking up someone else's time and energy. Um, but like I said, so over the course of that year, really narrowing down what I wanted to do, and where I ultimately focused was, what I enjoyed most in some ways about my last role was solving problems. I love
Mm,
the puzzle of solving a problem and then helping someone else solve that problem. In many cases, in my last role, that was helping faculty either to develop training or to develop elements of their course, to design learning outcomes and objectives, and figure out how to put that, whether it was into a course or into something else, in a way that would facilitate learning and facilitate application. And seeing someone's aha moments, I
mhm.
very selfishly, in a way, find really rewarding. And that's been something across all of my major jobs and careers is, okay, how can I help someone else understand something, achieve something, build something? All right, okay, that's what I enjoy in many ways. Um, and as much as work is always work, right, to one extent or
Right.
another, but for me, as long as I have enough of those moments, I can feel fulfilled. As long as there's some balance there of the things I really find rewarding, um, I'm good, right? My job is not my life. My career is not my life. My identity is not my career. Which I think a lot of transitioning teachers struggle with. So much of your identity is this one thing, and I won't say that was never part of it for me, because there was a huge part of, when people ask, "What do you do?" That's what I would say. I'm a teacher. I work at this university. Here are the kinds of things that I do. Here's how I work with students. Here's what my writing center is doing, etc. But ultimately, to me, a job is a means to an end more than anything else.
Yeah,
And
amen to that.
like, and I think teachers and educators in particular can fall victim to that mindset in the worst ways that result in exploitation and
Yeah.
result in burnout. And I think there is, particularly as folks are transitioning, like a search for a dream job that doesn't exist, and
Well, I think
understanding.
that that brings up a good point though, because you talked about something and I don't want to lose it because it was in what you said about it took you a year to figure out what you wanted to do. And you do see I see, right? Because a large my general practice works with a lot of folks who are pivoting, and a lot of those people, kind of a subcategory, are educators who want to make that move. And I noticed there's this urgency to, like, I got to pick something right now. And then wanting to jump into that and have it happen right away and work right away. And um, I would love for you to talk a little bit about maybe where you found value in slowing down in that process of, you spent a year. And I just think that most people, they maybe they start looking much longer after the first signals came to them. They started feeling that urge, like, this isn't feeling like it's where I want to be anymore. But um, maybe you could talk a little bit about, that was there value in spending a year versus trying to hurry up in a week? You're going to have 10 intense coffee chats in a week and decide what you're going to do next.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I'm rambling, interrupt me, please. Um, yeah, so I was working my last job while doing some of that research and
Yeah.
doing outreach and networking and trying to, um, not only build something, but to figure out all of the things that I didn't know, because that's what was immediately apparent is, all right, I've been at this job for a decade. I've been off the market for a decade. Hiring has changed so much and continues to change, right? So for me, I was working in that last job and trying to build a parachute for myself
Mm,
so that I could leave. And I realize there is an intense luxury and privilege in being able to do that, right? Not everyone can continue in an existing job while looking. But I needed that. I needed that time. Um, and I also needed a plan. I didn't know what I was going to do. I just knew I had to leave within a kind of a relatively short time frame, and relatively short in that sense being like, okay, I can maybe do this for a couple of more years, but the
okay.
writing on the wall was really urging me to leave. um, and here's where I will also say, having the like unwarranted, unbridled confidence of a mediocre middle-aged white man really helps. Where you're just like, okay, I know I can do something. I just don't know what it is yet. If I give myself enough time and devote time and attention to figuring out what I will do and how I will get there, I know that I will get there. So yeah, if you have that luxury,
Yeah.
I feel such empathy for folks who have to leave fast, or who, comes to May and a semester is ending, and people will DM me and say, "I need a new job by August," and it's like,
Yeah. Don't
"Good
think
luck."
that's right, but that's not gonna happen most likely. Yeah.
I will also say I needed time to fail repeatedly, and apply for things that I thought that I was qualified for that I clearly wasn't, and
Yeah.
to like adapt to a new job market and new hiring models, and to be willing to say, okay, I have to examine why I'm not getting these roles that I think I'm qualified for. What am I doing wrong? And learning how to quantify my experience in a way that someone would actually care about, and
Mhm.
learning how to put data and numbers behind everything that I had done for 12 years. That took me a long time. If you if someone out there can learn how to do those things in a month or two, amazing. But I
Yeah.
know that I'm not smart enough to be able to do that. Um, I really had to work hard and plug away through constant failure for months, and just failure and learning, and critical self analysis to kind of get a sense of, oh, here's how my resume and my application materials can improve every time. here's
Mm.
how here's how I can narrow things down, because I was casting such a wide net at the beginning that I was just setting myself up for failure and didn't
That
even
might have been
know.
when we started talking. I think the wide
Mhm.
net rings a bell. Yeah. But
Yeah.
what's interesting though too is that um one of the things that really has always stood out about you to me is that you made this pivot, but somewhere along the way, like you also created this um, really loyal following on LinkedIn of Ben Erwin fans. And uh, yes, Mr. Ben Erwin, who has more
You
than
mean
50,000 followers. You know, nobody fall for this whole like he said to me, I'm not that interesting before we started talking, and I was like, it's always the most interesting people who say that they're not interesting. But I think there's something to me that is so interesting about what you did, because this was almost like a multi-dimensional thing. Like, yes, you made this career pivot and you went through your own path and your trials and your errors and all of that, but somewhere or somehow along the way, you also started this LinkedIn presence, and you gave a little nod and said, I used LinkedIn as part of my networking and interacting with people. But I think you're one of the people who has done LinkedIn so well. because you're you on LinkedIn. You're a real person, you show up, you interact with people. How did you get into that? Or like, where did the LinkedIn stuff? Because here's why I'm asking, and then I'll let you talk. So many job seekers have this idea that they have to start posting on LinkedIn to get a job. I disagree with that. I think if you love posting on LinkedIn, that could be part of your personal strategy. But to force yourself to do something you don't feel drawn to, it's probably not going to yield the results you want. But for you, Ben, like you really have, hi, Holly. Holly Owens just said hi to you and me in the comments. You have really done an amazing job of not only harnessing LinkedIn for your job search and your professional journey, but also just this bigger representation of you online. And I would love to hear you talk to people about that a little bit. How did you start posting and find your voice and get 50,000 followers?
Okay, so I'll try to unpack the pieces of that.
Okay.
So first of all, I spent years as a variety of things as a writer, but as a newspaper columnist. If you
Mhm.
want a loudmouth jerk who is happy to espouse opinions all day, every day about anything, I'm built for that. So having kind of a combination of a background in writing and publishing, while
Mhm.
also being in a position where I worked as a reporter, as a critic, as a columnist. So I was very familiar with putting my opinions and my perspective out into the world. I was also really fortunate to have a um, a professor, a mentor when I was, just starting in college, who said, "Hey, everyone in this field knows how to write. What makes you valuable is you. Whatever it is that kind of is unique about you is what you can find ways to amplify." And that's sort of something that's always stuck with me. Um, so in my real life, I am acerbic and critical and all of these things, and that is, whether I want it to or not, probably going to come through in everything that I write and everything that I say. So I was more than comfortable with putting my ideas out into the world. My wife is very active on LinkedIn and has been since well before me. um, so seeing as she was kind of building what became her business through LinkedIn, you know, I was able to also see the power of that medium and that platform, especially post COVID, where you really saw this influx of folks in education who really hadn't, to my knowledge, been on LinkedIn much
No,
for that.
no. Yeah.
Right. So you kind of have this captive audience and this void of content for that audience. Um, so kind of inspired by what my wife was doing. She's like, you like to talk. Put some of these thoughts out on the internet, and not on Reddit or something. Put these ideas onto the internet so I don't have to listen to them quite so often. And my approach on LinkedIn started with honestly trying to articulate my experience
Mhm.
and what I was doing as a career pivoter, where I was successful, where I was faltering, and just trying to share that, because that's oftentimes what I initially enjoyed most about LinkedIn was, okay, I can learn from all these people. We don't have to be best friends, but if you're sharing content, I can learn from all of that. So and the content that I enjoyed most was the kind of personal mixed with the professional. So
Mhm.
quite honestly, just stealing ideas from people who are smarter than me, more successful than me, kind of studying what folks were doing and trying to find my own way into that. And along that process, um, to me, again, what was rewarding and what ultimately started building a bit of an audience was focusing on helping people. It became, okay, how can I help someone? How can I've made a million mistakes. I've failed countless times. How can I help someone else avoid that same pitfall? And really unsurprisingly, what I found is if you focus a little bit less on yourself and more on your audience, folks are more likely to find you. So that to me is kind of where things shifted. Especially, I'll be honest, once I actually found my current role, it became a lot easier to say,
Yeah.
hey, you guys, I've actually done this thing. I made a transition. I'm not completely um, speaking from zero experience.
Yeah.
Here's how I can hopefully help you not make so many of the mistakes that I did. And for the most part, people for some reason responded well to some of that.
Well, because it's authentic. I think that's the piece of it too, is like you said, you lead so much with, when you lead from that lens, and I think we've all heard that saying about, when you get up on a stage, it's not about you, it's about the audience. And it's that same kind of thing. I think when you're leading from a place of, helping someone else, that certainly resonates with people. And I would say that that is a word that I associate with you so closely, is helping, because anyone who mentions your name or when your name comes up, it's always like, Ben is so helpful, or the information he posts was honest and really helpful. And so, I do think that especially on, social media, where people are so quick to hide the stuff that doesn't look perfect, or to not talk about the misses or mistakes, the fact that you shared those things along the way, or said, hey, I don't think I did this the right way, I think that was really, I think that was really powerful, and it earned a lot of trust with a lot of people, that they could see sort of the full 360 picture of, it's not just the bright shiny stuff, it was also, yeah, I tried this and this didn't work. And I mean, take it for what it's worth, right? Like, maybe it'll help you in what you're doing. um Also, want to give a shout out, because I think you and Kate, so Kate Erwin is Ben's wife, and they are a LinkedIn powerhouse couple. So we should have had like the three of us on here. I was thinking about this, and I thought, we should have done Erin, Ben, and Kate, because I think I met Kate. Did I meet her in Brand 30 maybe? Did she do Brand 30?
Yes.
Okay. I think that's how she and I met back in the day. So, but yeah, it's just, I think it's really cool that the two of you are both doing LinkedIn and doing your own things on LinkedIn. But um, all right. So I'm going to jump topics a little bit, because you're working as an instructional designer now, and you work for Purdue University. And it's like, that's a really credible organization, right? Like, everybody knows Purdue University. You moved into this great role. Maybe we could talk a little bit about, for people who are possibly in that early consideration stage of like, well, I might leave the classroom. I don't know what I want to do. Maybe we could go real one-on-one for a minute and just talk a little bit about, what do you do in your day to day, and what were the really important things that helped you be ready to land a job like that?
Yeah. So, one, I will frame all of this as saying I am also fortunate to have an excellent supervisor and an amazing team full of people who not only know so much more than me about instructional design and so many other things, but who are also so willing to share their knowledge. Which is
Yeah.
something that always kind of bothered me about academia is there's a certain contingent of folks who have this feeling as if if they share their knowledge, it becomes less valuable because more
Mm.
people have access to it. And that's always been one of my beefs with education and a certain kind of academic. um, but in terms of sort of what I do now and how I made that transition, as I was researching instructional design and looking at those sort of ID frameworks like Addy and SAM and backwards design and Gagne's events, and immediately seeing, oh, I'm doing some of these things as an
Mhm.
instructor, as someone who is collaborating with faculty all the time already on curriculum design and learning outcomes and course objectives and translating someone else's ideas into a course, um, I was talking about them in different ways, oftentimes calling them different things, but oh, that's what I'm doing, right? This iterative process of creating something that helps an audience not only learn something, but apply that knowledge in a very clear and specific way. So in some ways, my background in teaching was really helpful, but what I think really prepared me for was all of the other work that I was doing as a writing center director. My previous institution, we really didn't have instructional designers. So the Writing Center became this hub where faculty would come for help. And I would oftentimes be that person designing and leading workshops and doing all of this work, whether it was one on one or in small groups with faculty, and talking with them about how to construct learning and how to translate that to students, because I think a lot of faculty are incredible experts in their field and in their discipline, but weren't always focused on their teaching, right? Especially
Mm.
for in disciplines where teaching is just something you do because a university then funds your research, right?
Yeah.
You're
Yeah, true.
you're not always focused on student learning and student outcomes in the way that other disciplines, liberal arts, tend to be. Um, so being able to apply that experience to what I'm doing now, where it's so much of the same thing, but it's much more focused in that, when I'm working with faculty, we're meeting every week, we're building their courses from the top down. And my role, because I'm working predominantly with engineering faculty, tends to be, okay, I am your ignorant audience. I am like your students. I don't know thing one about engineering. If you give me math, I am terrified and I will run away. But I can also kind of use that ignorance to help ask questions and to play play the role that students might in terms of whether or not they'll understand something. So, the faculty who I'm working with are frequently some of the most brilliant people on the planet. Um, and I'm just there to kind of facilitate and bring those ideas to life and say, oh, okay, if these are your learning outcomes, let's come up with all of these ways that we can then present that. And how can we scaffold this information to build and facilitate that learning? And how are we thinking about the application of that learning within the context of your course and in many cases in future courses? Right? So you're building this one thing with an eye toward what students or learners are going to be doing in the future. So a lot of that faculty collaboration has just not just translated, because it's changed forms, but the fundamentals of being curious, asking a lot of questions, and kind
Mm.
of being a gadfly in terms of saying, well, what about this? Will this, who are your students? What do they know? And what do they need to know by the end of your course? And just, again, I'm not the smartest person in the world, but I'm inherently curious. And I think that that is kind of a secret weapon for instructional designers, is
Mm.
you have to be curious about what someone is doing, why they're doing it, who they're doing it for, and how you can bring that to life in in a way that's most effective and appropriate for their audience, whoever that audience might be.
Yeah, yeah. I have another friend who works in instructional design for a insurance company, and she, kind of like you. It's lots of questions because you're not the expert typically, right? Like you are not that professor or the person who understands all the code of insurance, but you have to be the who, what, when, where, why, how person who says, explain all these things to me so I can understand it and then put it into a learning model that someone else who might not understand it could watch or go through and then walk away with knowledge. And I think that that is maybe something that a lot of teachers who are coming from the classroom, they might not always have the clearest perspective on that, that they're not going to be necessarily the expert on the topic, because in the classroom, you often are the expert on the curriculum already. And so the work that they're doing to build additional content and all of that, it can feel a little bit like a shift, or almost like a little bit of like that imposter syndrome or that discomfort when you move into a space where you're trying to build something that you don't inherently know about or haven't spent a lot of time learning about already. So how, I mean, I'm guessing it's probably from your background, because we've talked about, like, you've sort of step A in your career has helped step B, and step B has helped step C. But if somebody were looking to break into instructional design, and maybe that's something they're running into, is that discomfort of feeling like I'm not the expert, what might you say to them?
I depending on their existing experience and level of knowledge, what really helped me personally was deeply researching a lot of those ID frameworks and those models to try to understand where that overlap was in my previous experience, and also
Mhm.
giving me a sense of what I needed to know so that I could really dive into some upskilling. Um, and figuring out too how to translate that experience for someone else, right? Like I knew that I could do my current job. I know that I can do roles similar to my current job. Convincing someone else who does not know me of that fact, is a different challenge. So I would say really understanding the fundamentals of what instructional design is. The fact that it's an idea that's been around since World War II, right? This is not new.
Has it really?
Yeah. Uh, and also like instructional design takes so many different forms. I work in higher ed still, but if I was working in a corporate environment or for a nonprofit, that work would fundamentally share some similarities, but would be really different, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's another key element is understanding all the forms that this kind of work can take. And to me, that's where networking, even if it's just lurking and like following a lot of people, can be really helpful to really critically examine, oh, what does this work look like in these different contexts? How can I prepare myself for that work? How can I present my previous experience in ways that illustrates an understanding of that work, and where might I need to like identify and then fill gaps. Again, I'll be very honest. I was in a very, or am in a very privileged position during my transition where, you know, my current supervisor reached out to me about the role that I now have. Like he sent me a message on LinkedIn
Yeah.
and said, "Hey, we're about to have some job openings. Do you want to, would you be open to have a chat?" I said, "Yes, absolutely. Thank you." Um,
Yeah.
and
And what, I'm going to interrupt you. Why did they do that? Like, I think that's like, probably people just heard that and they were like, wait a minute, why did the hiring manager reach out to Ben? Right. Because that's sort of the unicorn of the universe version of job search. So tell me, what was going on that this person reached out to you?
Oh, it was directly because of content I was creating on LinkedIn.
Okay.
It was explicitly the fact that I was talking about my experience, both past and as a seeker, and that I was talking about the field of instructional design, and that I was, illustrating some understanding, albeit kind of a shallow one, right? Because I hadn't, hadn't previously had ID as a title. hadn't worked directly in that field, right? Um, but I think seeing how I was approaching the work philosophically, what my
Mhm.
ethos was, um, and and I was very skeptical as well because I've had lots of people reach out saying like, "Do you want to talk about this thing?" And then 5 minutes in, it's immediately a sales pitch and not a job.
Yeah.
Um, right, but knowing that I hadn't like held that role before, um, and having minimal experience with some of the technical tools like Rise and Storyline and Captivate and all the tools that IDs often use. Um,
Yeah.
and I was very upfront about what I had experience with and what I hadn't, and what I was
Yeah.
working on and what I was upskilling. um, and he was very honest and said, we can teach you all of that stuff. Like here's why we're interested. It's more this background in education theory and in learning and how you're approaching the process. So again, I think that is also an instance where instructional design in some facet of education or ed tech can be a little bit different,
Mm.
right? I was afforded time my first year to work with others and to learn a lot of those things that I didn't know and to bolster my technical skills while having pretty deep background knowledge and experience of course design and curriculum design and online education and all of these other things that some of my colleagues had or have and some of them don't, right?
Yeah.
So it was really a matter of putting myself out there in a way that promoted my skills and knowledge, and also a lot of luck in the fact that my skill set happened to fit into that particular team,
Yeah.
which like having sat on dozens of hiring committees over the years, I think job seekers don't always understand, like, yeah, sometimes it's 100% you, sometimes it has nothing to do with you.
Yeah.
And there are so many weird variables when it comes to why and how someone gets hired, that like trying to figure all of that out is sometimes a fool's errand. But yeah, so a bit of luck, but a lot of trying to kind of put forth any knowledge or skills that I had in a way that, I'll be honest, like I was doing it to attract attention. I'm very crass. I love attention, and that was part of my goal, was to find ways to present myself as a potential instructional designer, right? And
Yeah.
not as a teacher, not as a former teacher, but as someone who could step into an ID role and succeed.
You know, I tried not to interrupt you multiple times because I kept being like, "Oh, I wanna talk to him about oh, I wanna talk to him about that." And the problem with not interrupting people is then I forgot what I wanted to say. Um, oh, I remember. So you leveraged a bridge, and I think this is an important concept for a lot of job seekers, that when they pivot, from thing A to thing B, they oftentimes miss the opportunity to look for the resources in their backpack that will still be useful in the next job. And it might be a reframing, it might be sort of refeaturing. So maybe, you're going to talk about them in a different way or order or something like that. But like you said, your opportunity that you have today came because you had a deficit or a skill gap in some areas that could be learned and built, but you had this deep fundamental knowledge from your previous experience and you were sharing that openly, and that became your biggest asset because the team, the manager felt a need to bring that in. Like that was the most important piece, right? Like they wanted somebody who understood those deep fundamental things. They can teach you how to use a computer program. And a lot of times I see the opposite happen, where pivoters will focus, especially teachers, they'll obsess over the computer programs, right? Like I have to learn all these tools, and I'm not saying you don't, because being comfortable with the tools of the trade can be very important and very powerful. And I'm sure there's tons of people who would credit learning that and then being able to show their work as the reason they were successful. But what I don't want people to miss is that there's so many roads to a successful next step. And in your case, you were able to really harness the stuff that you already had, and you were honest and authentic, and you really led with that. And that actually became the attraction point. And I don't think as many job seekers look at it that way, of like taking inventory of what they have already and how do I really show that that is something valuable.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I designed and led hundreds of workshops for students and faculty.
Yeah.
I had, overseen a staff of 40 plus people. So I'm interviewing, onboarding, creating and delivering training in person, online, asynchronously. So, those materials weren't in, Rise or Storyline, but I also had those things in my back pocket to say, "Oh, here's what I've done, as a course designer. Here's what I've done as a curriculum designer, things that then got used across my department. Here's what I had done, as a director and as someone training and leading a staff." So I think that's really important too, is looking for, when someone asks for, essentially a portfolio, that you
Mhm.
have something to show. It doesn't inherently have to be in one format or style. I was very frank in saying, well, here's some of the materials that I've designed throughout the last decade, and here's how I would update them using these tools. Right. So not only having something to show, but illustrating some kind of awareness of, oh, and if I were to use anything remotely like this in a new context for a new audience, here's how I would update it. Here's how I would transform it to fit that audience. Right. Um, so I think, uh, any teacher has something valuable that they can share from their previous work. Um, it's a matter of figuring out what is going to resonate with
Mhm.
someone with the power to actually hire, and presenting that in a way that's going to be persuasive. Um, and again, I like, so much of my experience was luck as well. It was a lot of preparation, but luck play played a legitimate and significant role in that as well. Um, which is why I'm hesitant to tell anyone to, like, follow the path that I
Well,
went through.
and there isn't one path. And I think, I run a business where I offer services that help people navigate these things, right? And one of the first things I say to somebody is like, there are so many different ways to do this. And there isn't like a box that's locked somewhere that has the 6 simple steps you'll follow to 100% certainly make this happen for yourself, other than start doing it, be consistent, and don't quit until you make it happen. Like, I can guarantee that you'll make it happen if you do those 3 things, but the how is gonna look so different for everybody. And for some people, it's like a bird's eye line of flight that, they got there in the shortest, quickest way possible because they just went at it and went, we can say they were lucky, but I hate saying the word lucky, because I think that oftentimes behind luck there's a lot of effort that made that luck happen. But there's other people who do very wandering paths, or they do one thing and they find that thing's not for them, and then that makes their way to the next thing. I have people who went for CSM and then found they wanted to be PMs, and so no, none of us has like the guaranteed recipe. But I think in sharing the story of Ben or of any person who went through this journey and is still on the journey, right? Because who knows what's to come. But it sparks ideas, hopefully. And I think that once you hear an idea or you see something that's possible, that possibility is an amazingly dangerously good thing in that it gives you context or frame of reference to say, oh, maybe I could try that too. Oh, Ben posted on LinkedIn. Okay, I was kind of on the fence about doing it. Maybe I'm going to try posting on LinkedIn. So yeah, I don't want you to be quick to dismiss or say like I shouldn't give advice, because I don't think there is one way of doing it, but I definitely think what you've done is so valuable because you paid attention, you tried things, you took risks, you screwed up, you course corrected, and you've been really good to people as you've gone through this whole process. And I think that one is probably also maybe something I'd put on the list of must do's, is like treat people well and be a good person along the way, because that goes a long way. Um, I see that Mandy asked us a question. Mandy said, can you talk a bit more about the portfolio process and how you created it? Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yes, I am a terrible example of someone to talk about portfolios since I don't really have one still. I'm currently working on one, but so what I had was a collection of materials. I literally had, um, handouts and resources and things from hundreds of workshops and from a decade of training materials that I had designed and then implemented with my staff. So um, a lot of that, was literally PDFs and things that
Yeah.
I then translated. I'll be honest, I used Google Slides for and Canva for a lot of that stuff to translate that text into a more visual medium. And um, with my current role, I'll be honest, I shared both versions of some of
Okay.
that, and I said, "Hey, here's this massive amount of material that I've written and designed and deployed, and here's the translation of a tiny fraction of that, just so you can see how I'm approaching this." For folks who are looking to create or needing to create a portfolio, I would say start with looking at, find good examples as models. Like that
Mhm.
that was, that's where LinkedIn is amazing. The internet is amazing. You can find good examples, like find people who are in the kinds of roles that you want to have and look at what their portfolio looks like, which is not to say, copy it verbatim, but find four or five good, or what ring true to you as good effective examples, and try to synthesize those ideas in your head and see where your experience and your materials might fit into those models. And I think for transitioning educators, like, I was fortunate to have, taught in person and online, so I had all this material. I just had to curate it and had to find ways to present it. For some folks, that might mean taking courses you've taught in person and reconfiguring them to show them as more of an instructional design model, and to
Mhm.
digitize them in a more visual way that fits into the needs of a given role that you're applying for. So I'm a bad example for that, um, but I would say, look for a variety of models and examples that you can follow. And I would say, like, folks like Luke Hobson and Tim Slade, there's an entire world of amazing, incredibly talented instructional designers who are way better than me at this. Look at their materials and
Yeah.
pilfer liberally, because that's what I did.
Yeah.
I looked at all the IDs I was connected with, and I mentioned a few of them, and I went to their websites because they have websites. I don't. I looked at their portfolios, I looked at their materials, and thought through, okay, how does this parallel what I have in terms of materials, and how can I present it? And
Yeah.
that's where I learned quite honestly, about a lot of the kinds of documents you might need in a portfolio. Some of which I had, some of which I didn't, and had to create some of the like project management kinds of materials, right? All of those things existed in my head. I had never put them on paper or put them online. So I think that is a much faster, easier way to learn than listening to anything I
Yeah.
have to say about portfolios.
Well, and two things. So one, again, you took this approach of posting on LinkedIn and creating content on LinkedIn and you said I didn't really have a portfolio, but in a way your portfolio was your LinkedIn presence. And it presented a little differently, right? Your portfolio talked about you and your perspective and sort of your ethos as a learner and somebody who was getting into this field. And so I could see where that content in a way someone would only need to say, okay, show me some examples of some stuff that and you sort of hand them your pile of papers or your digital equivalent and say, I did this too. And they'd be like, okay, cool. Like we already liked this guy and he can do this stuff. I think if people are going maybe the more traditional route where they're applying, they want to have a portfolio that they're linking on their resume. I'm with you. Tim's a good friend. Tim Slade is a good friend of mine as well. And I'm always very careful I don't mention a lot of people who sell stuff because I feel like there's I don't know, a lot of people taking people's money out there. But, I, what Tim has done, I know he's worked in the space. I love his story of he came from loss prevention. So he had no background in this and then worked in instructional design for a long time. And to your point earlier about either like if you don't have that budget of taking a course like that and going through someone's program because it is a commitment, right? And it'll be great if you do it, but use the internet. Like the internet is so free and so available. And probably the biggest gotcha is making sure that you can identify what's good as an example and what's not good as an example. And sometimes that can be hard when you're new to something. But I would say, especially to our transitioning educators, start with the Google machine. Like Google that stuff. Look on LinkedIn. Search for people who are instructional designers. See if they have portfolios linked on their profiles. There's so much free goodness out there that if you can't make it happen because the financial investment might be too high to go through someone's structured program, you can absolutely put it together with a little bit of elbow grease and some keyboard searches. And I wish I saw more people doing that, right? Like just using the free resources around them.
Yeah, I'm firmly of the belief there's a lot of charlatans on LinkedIn. As much as I love that platform, there's a lot of
Yeah.
folks, peddling snake oil that 90% of which can be quickly and easily found in a
Yeah.
judicious Google search, right?
Yeah.
And I would I would caution anyone from spending significant money on resources. This is again where having that year of research and doing a lot of things on my own while working was really helpful, right?
Yeah.
Because I looked at all those programs. I looked at all of these, certifications. Whether or not anyone cares about any of them is another thing, right? Um, and realizing, oh, I can do a lot of this on my own. It's going to
Yeah.
take longer, it's going to require more time and more effort, right? Paying for a course, if you have that privilege and luxury, is a great way to power level.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't, it's not necessary.
Yeah.
And
It won't prevent you from achieving your goal if you can't do the fancy course.
yes, and I think conversely, just because you've completed a fancy course doesn't mean
True.
you have learned much.
It's not a guaranteed ticket, is it?
Like having seen a lot of those courses at this point, the irony is that now I have access to so many things that would have been helpful to me like 4 years ago,
Yeah.
and now people are like, hey, you want to check this out? And I don't know. That's a
Yeah.
whole other conversation, but some of it is absolutely amazing, and there's great folks selling useful resources, but there's a lot of people looking to exploit transitioning teachers in particular because they smell that desperation
Yeah.
and know that you might not have thousands of dollars to invest in upskilling, but you probably have a couple hundred,
Yeah.
and you've already spent your money by the time that you realize that you've wasted that cash on something obvious and very shallow.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, going back to, I think that's why what you've shared, I mean, hopefully people will look you up on LinkedIn and go back. I mean, you post a lot of content, so they're going to have to just go back into the archives and read all the stuff. But it's important to tap into that free stuff, to see what people are sharing who have been there, have done that, who, someone like yourself, there's nothing, you're not peddling something at the end of it. There's nothing that you're doing that's trying to drive somebody to a result other than just sharing information. And that's a big one, is asking around. I think, it's good, especially if you're newer in the transitioning teacher community. It has the last, I don't know what, 3 years, I have seen such an uptick in teacher focused assistance. And it's a lot of people who, probably are on some spectrum of qualification to actually help with these things. We won't get into that too much, but um asking around, making sure you slow down. Don't let urgency be something that leads you to make a quick bad decision. And so starting with Google, researching, asking people who've been there, done that, I think is my number one favorite thing to tell people. So you find someone like Ben who helps and is kind and has been through it. And again, we'll tell you, hey, this is the way I did it. And maybe you're not going to go recreate this step for step, but maybe pieces and parts of this might resonate with you. Or maybe this is going to help you take one right next step in the right next direction. And I think that kind of stuff, getting comfortable with not having the full solution right in front of you, that's when you don't fall prey to some of that stuff. Like, oh, you pay me, $10,000 and I'll guarantee that you fill in the blank, whatever your goal is, right? I mean, I've heard horror stories of $5,000 packages with interest being charged and all kinds of stuff. Yeah. So, um, super icky.
Again, I think that's where LinkedIn can be so helpful. There are
Yeah.
so many folks who are so much better than me at instructional design and at helping folks. Um, for anyone who does dig back into my content, look at some of the individuals who I'm trying to share materials from. Go dig into their LinkedIn profiles, look at their featured content in particular. Like that to me is the most valuable feature on all of LinkedIn, is the ability to feature specific content, so that when
Hmm.
someone, if you're a career transitioner or a job seeker, you can go to someone's profile, and if they've done a reasonable job of curation, you can see all of their best, most important, most valuable resources in featured content. You don't even have to to look really hard
Dig.
necessarily. And not that that is always the best litmus test, but I tend to tell folks, like, you can kind of, um, I won't say judge someone by their LinkedIn profile, but you can see folks who have put considerable time and effort into building LinkedIn as a resource for themselves and for other people, versus someone who is just on the platform. So if you're researching instructional design and instructional designers, pay close attention to those profiles, not just the content they're creating and sharing, which can be amazing, but like, look at their headline, look at their banner, look at their bio. How are they describing themselves? How are they describing their experience? And how are they being persuasive in presenting themselves as professionals. You can you can tell a lot about someone by a cursory glance, oftentimes, not universally, but oftentimes, based just on what they have identified as important on their
Yeah.
profile. And then like follow those folks, interact, engage, and I don't know. I always just go back to like, if you can help somebody today, do it. You're never going to feel bad about having taken some time and effort to help someone. Um,
You might have just like jumped the gun a little bit here on my last question that I was going to ask you, which is always, because it's 1 o'clock already. I don't know how this happened, but um, I always ask like a piece of advice, good advice, whether it's something that you have sort of formulated yourself over time or something that someone has given you. But what's a good nugget of advice you'd leave people with besides the one that you just gave us?
um, I would say, look for the things about yourself that makes you unique, whether that's your background, your experience, um, especially in instructional design, where so few people actually say, "Oh yeah, I went to college to be an instructional designer, and I got a degree, and I earned a
Yeah.
degree in instructional design, and then I, transitioned seamlessly um, some sort of ID role, whether it was academic, corporate, or nonprofit."
Hmm.
Right? Those folks exist, and they're wonderful. But I think they're the minority in this field, at least for right now. Um, so recognizing that so many people currently working in the field have such diverse, like disparate backgrounds and experiences, and all of those things that you've done can be valuable in one way or another to this kind of work. I think you just have to think critically about what is it that's actually important or what can transfer. And in some cases that's what can translate directly, and oftentimes it's more akin to what things have I done that run parallel to this kind of work that I can
Yeah.
find a way to translate. um, and that's something that took me a long time to realize, and that I had to put a lot of time and effort into really figuring out, but ultimately knowing, oh yeah, all of these things that I've done helped me understand this kind of work and help me to understand, how people learn and how I can help craft effective, productive, like learning environments. How it's just a matter of how do I use that experience, right? Even
Yeah.
now, like having been a reporter, so much of my job now is asking SMEs dozens of questions and like being inherently curious about what they're doing, why they're doing it, who their audience is, and what they need to accomplish. And I would say probably 40% of my job is asking people questions and figuring out where I can actually fit in a helpful way. Since I don't have the subject matter expertise, I don't have the knowledge to put these things together, and we need to collaborate in one way or
Yeah.
another to make these things happen. So, stuff that I was doing literally 25 years ago now, that is a core component of what seems like an entirely different, disconnected field altogether.
Yeah. Yeah. It's that taking inventory of the stuff that that we all take for granted, that we kind of go, oh well, I was a reporter for years. Well, no, those skills that you built are probably some of your most important skills, like you just said today. So, Ben, I can't thank you enough for giving up an hour of your day here to come and chat. And I know that there are so many people who are just wonderful fans of yours, who really enjoy the help and the content that you put out on LinkedIn. And so if folks are listening and they're not following you, I certainly hope that they will go and give you a follow, interact in your comments and all of that. But again, I think that this was really important because we met each other back when you were like, maybe, kind of, I don't know. I know something needs to change, but I'm not sure what it is. Like, let's look at my resume. And you've just navigated this in a really human way and in your own way. And you've made it happen. And I think that that's the takeaway that I really hope folks have today is that there isn't just one way of doing something. There's many ways, and finding the way that feels true to you is probably the best way. So, with that, I think we'll go ahead. We're going to end the stream. Thanks everybody for joining Friday Career Lunch Break, and we will see you next week.